view it seriously. Like,
Yes.
I think Google caters more on hiring. Okay, once we hire you, we know more likely you're going to be successful. So he kind of built me up a bit, especially that I was more of a younger person, probably like a mid-level. I was in a mid-level role, but I was still very much an imposter. Like, I remember seeing people coding these insane things. I remember my first set of code that I asked to review. It was just destruction. Destruction. There's no other way to describe it other than utter destruction. But after a while, you kind of, and I realized it was everything that, all the comments that I got, it was ultimately helpful.
Okay.
You know, and I was able to, it was definitely a good learning experience. And by like, after my first performance review, I kind of figured out where I am in the company, basically, and where I can have like impact with what I'm going to be doing. So I would say the first couple weeks and months, I definitely had that imposter syndrome and like being bombarded with these bad PRs that I've been submitting. Well, these code reviews that I've been submitting. It was scared me at first, but I think my manager saying like, it's okay. Everyone is gonna go through this. And he kind of gave the parallel to like, you know, when you joined university at the same time at Cambridge or whatever, you were a bit scared, right? A bit of imposter. But when you reach there, you realize, you know, I put in the work. And he mentioned that I put in the work.
The show where we talk about data science in the Caribbean, highlighting practical ways that you can learn, get involved, and create your own impact using artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is the Caribbean Data Science Podcast with Mark Moyu and Jeff Sayon.
All right, Stefan, welcome to the show. Excited to dig into your journey today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. Excited to have a chat, a nice long chat.
Yes, perfect. So tell us, where are you in the world? What are you up to? Problems you're trying to solve, and you know what you're excited about.
Yeah, I guess. So right now I'm in London. Based in London, you know, the weather is not as good as it is back in the Caribbean. So right now it's a bit gloomy. I don't know if you can see outside clearly, but very overcast.
Yes.
So yeah, I've been in London for like almost, about 6 or 7 years now. And right now, currently, I'm working in a somewhat of a startup. I wouldn't say it's a startup because we IPO'd. So it's called Deliveroo. So those of you who might not know Deliveroo, it's just like Uber Eats, but specific to the UK and a few other markets that we have. And I'm working as a staff MLE, machine learning engineer there. Currently, with the team, I'm working on a lot of ranking stuff. I'll get into that a bit later, but a bit more of my background is that, you know, I've worked as an ML engineer in a few other companies like Twitter, Google, and also with Professor Patrick Hosein back home as a research engineer, research intern, how you want to call it. It was at the early stages of my career. So yeah, that's currently like what I'm doing right now.
Okay, great. And what the hell is a staff ML engineer? For those who don't know,
Yeah.
You see staff and you see principal, and you kind of wonder like, who's who and who's what, you know?
You know, sometimes I wonder whether I should even say that. I only said it just to be formal.
Yeah, the title. Use it.
I think how I would describe it is just like, for most companies, at least in the UK and US, like you go up to senior in engineering roles. It could be senior software engineer, senior ML engineer, senior data scientist. And that is almost like a terminal role. Like you can stay there for the rest of your career, and it's fine. There's no necessarily expectation for you to grow unless you personally want to grow. And if you want to grow, there's usually two roles. There's like the more technical route, which is like staff, principal, that's higher and higher. And then there's like the managerial route, like you want to be an engineering manager, senior engineering manager, director, VP, etc., etc. So I decided, because I felt like I am quite interested in the technical aspect and not as much as what my manager do, because when I look at my manager's calendar, I just see meetings for the whole day. And I'm like, that's not something I'm super interested in right now. So yeah, so the staff is just like one level above senior. So you just have a bit more responsibilities with respect to like thinking not necessarily within your team, but within the wider org that you're in, delivering impact at a wider level.
Huh. Yeah. So what's the sort of promotion process like? Because what's interesting is, I'm at NVIDIA and you see very few like staff and principal people. And when you look at them, like they've been there for a minute. And, I've looked at, let's say, Walmart's. I do work in ranking as well. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation. At other companies, you see staffs and principals, not necessarily a lot of them, but it's cool to hear that distinction through the fork. Like, all right, you're not a manager, you're actually pursuing the technical route. And are there a lot more expectations on you now that you're a staff machine learning engineer?
I would say I'm still trying to figure out the rule, to be honest, like, because there is almost like an expectation of one, you have to have, I don't want to say like a managerial mindset, but a more of a business mindset, because you're targeting, you're not coming at it like, oh, what model am I building? You're coming at it more of like, how is this going to increase our metric, our business? Yeah. So and it's not usually like a regression or a classification metric. It's a business metric, right? It's like, for our case, it's like order volume, customer lifetime value. So you're thinking about how can these things create impact? Like, will it impact the business metric? So I'm in a lot of business strategic meetings, and then I'm also in the regression classification meetings also. So it's I would say it's a bit challenging, because you have to kind of balance both the business mindset and the technical mindset, but also it's a bit rewarding in the sense that you don't necessarily go as deep in some of the projects that I'm working on. I stay a bit, I would think of it more breadth-wise.
Yes.
But I think that's how I think view my role, a bit of business, like 40% business, 60% technical side of it. So I'm like lots of meetings still, not as much as my manager, but I'm still in lots of meetings.
and there's a lot more justification that you have to provide now for your ideas, I imagine, right? Especially now you have to probably filter ideas that come from your senior data scientists, and you see the data engineers, you're like, why are we doing this? And I think one of the things that's good to highlight in what you said is, when people do machine learning, or they learn machine learning in school, it's like, oh, I get 90% accuracy. Great. Yeah. But your 90% accuracy on your little data set might mean, 1% accuracy on the real world, and it's complete garbage.
No uplift.
So tell us how you navigate that, and maybe what that shift in your mentality was like. Were you on the other side where you weren't necessarily thinking a lot about the business constraints, and you're like, all right, I need my model to be as accurate as possible, and someone else was managing that problem? Or did you always have that sense going through your career?
Yeah, I think definitely not. I didn't have that sense. I think really? Initially, as you said, because when I came out, when I graduated with my bachelor's, I worked, as I mentioned, with Professor Patrick Hosein. There I did some research. So that was slightly different, right? That I was more like, we focused it on the models alone. Yes. But when I came to the real, I wouldn't say real world, but the industry, one thing I realized, especially, is that I started to realize that my models, like, the simpler, the better. That's the first thing I've realized.
Because they could scale.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it's a quick iteration, less resources. Like, these are the things you think about as much when you're in academia. I know there's a lot of research now, but back then when I started, we didn't have these massive models and massive scalable infrastructure. So I think one thing that I started to think about was, like, on the business side, like I forget it's Occam's razor.
Occam's razor, yeah.
Occam's razor, yeah. The simplest solution is probably the answer. So that's how I started to think about modeling when I first came there. And then also, as you mentioned, like the business aspects, like you needed to achieve certain business metrics. And at first I was like, what is this? What is like a 2% uplift in, I don't know anything about that. What is that, right? I just know about, as you said, 90% accuracy. So what I had to kind of understand is thinking about how my model would affect the system in the real world, as you said, in production. And would really, if I work on a particular heuristic, Like I can go down the heuristic side. I find heuristics are quite useful there. Like even at Google, when I was at Google, a quick insider's tip, lots of models there, not models, there's lots of heuristics built in there.
Yeah.
And by heuristic, I just mean like statements, like if then else statements, not models. And that's one thing I also realized was like heuristics are really good and they get you a lot of the way. And that kind of ties back into the business metrics. Like if your business metric is, for instance, a 2% uplift in, I would just use my example, order volume or clicks, like most people are relevant, like Instagram probably uses that, Twitter, Google, like clicking something, increasing clicks, right? If your heuristic gets that done with one small tiny CPU and with a 0.001 millisecond latency, that's fine. I don't need to build a model. And I think one other thing that came with experience is not only understanding the business side of things and the model, but is the infrastructure. I think when I first started, I came out of like my master's and stuff, and I was like, okay, yeah, I know all these models. I can't wait to put them into production. And I was so keen to do this. And then when you reach there, you realize, okay, I need to build this data pipeline to ingest the data. I need to think about how I'm going to scale my model. I'm going to think about how we're going to package my model in order to serve. As I got more experience, I started to work a lot more on the infrastructure side because I realized there's a lot of uplift in getting this really well, making this pipeline really stable, really repeatable, rather than focusing only on the model. So that's another thing that I've learned over the years. A lot of infrastructure work is quite important.
Yes.
As a machine learning engineer, I would say.
So lots to unpack there. I think one of the things
too much.
Yeah. And I think this is the challenging part of education in machine learning and to some degree software engineering, because you code in isolation oftentimes of a real production environment, and this is modulo. Some of the people that do research, and I think even research has a lot of opportunities for considerations for production. Like I think there should be a section in a paper that says, okay, this is really good for fundamental knowledge, but for actually going to production, absolute trash. Like some of the stuff I worked on in my PhD and published papers, I'm just like, this shit is not working in production. Absolutely not.
Never. No, I totally, like, there are some, like, even in this company, right? Like, we don't have the resources of Google, for instance. So, like, when Google published papers, and when I was working there too, you see, like, BERT was published when I was working there.
Wow. That's big, man.
Yeah. No, I wasn't part of it.
No, but just saying, like, you being in Google around that time.
Yeah. I mean, it was quite exciting, and the infrastructure that Google has and everything is, like, amazing. Like, up to now, I haven't been in a company that's as good with their internal tooling as Google is. Like, they spend a lot of resources there. And I think that's almost a crux of it, in the sense that they release BERT, but then all these other companies, they're like, I can't scale this model. I can't put this model into production because I don't have the resources needed to do this. So that's another consideration, as you mentioned, with like papers. Like, realistically, all these big models, we can't. Smaller companies without the resources can't necessarily implement these models into production.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and so I work with like big retailers and small retailers. So you definitely see how, if you have good infrastructure, you technically are ahead of the curve. So we end up trying to do a lot of work to make it a lot easier to deploy the larger models, because you do see a lot of benefits, and I don't think heuristics will ever go away. Because something I always think about is, if I know the sun rises at this time and it sets at this time, why am I forcing a machine learning model to figure that out? Like, I know it.
Agreed. I think that was actually a shocking thing that I learned, like, that Google uses heuristics. I was like, really? Okay. But yeah, they definitely do. It is a lot of benefit in using heuristics, especially as a first pass. Like, a lot of stuff I'm doing now is some heuristic based stuff right now.
That's good to know. And you've been through, you have a bachelor's, a master's, you've been at Google, you've been at Twitter, and now you have the strategic technical role, and you're still relying, and I don't want to say relying actually, you're still implementing things that are simple, because that's literally to some degree what's as useful as is out there, right? Good.
Yeah, most definitely.
So tell us about, not necessarily, let's start with high school. Okay, what were you like in high school? We'll come to ranking and on those things once we get to Google, but tell us who Stefan was in high school, right? You're a music man as well, so tell us about that journey.
Yeah, well, I would say I was always into music.
Okay.
And it was only in Form 4, when I was about 15, almost going on to 16 years old, when I started kind of, looking at music on YouTube, and then starting to look at DJs, and then I was like, I really am starting to like some of the mixes. And it wasn't just the Trinidad DJs, it was like the foreign DJs. So one of the challenging things that I had was like when I started to think about, okay, I want to pursue this. So I got some equipment, told my parents, I want to be, I want to do this, right? So you needed like proper turntables, you needed like different jacks to set up your headphones and stuff like that. So I got some of the equipment. My parents were super keen to give me all the equipment at once.
Okay.
Like I was looking for like the Panasonic single turntables, digital and stuff, and they're like,
full setup.
And that was like £1,000. I was like, no.
For sure. Ooh, okay. Wow.
So I was like, okay, I'll just deal with what I have. But the challenging thing was that I had to, as you know, in Trinidad, lots of our music is like dancehall, soca, right? So it was a bit challenging at first because all of the tutorials online was how to do like, it's EDM music. I'm like, how can I learn DJing from Tiesto and all these guys? I'm like, But luckily enough, I kind of in trial and error, I was decent. I wouldn't say I was good. I was decent.
Okay.
And I played at a few like house parties and stuff like that. So that was kind of like my side gig. I didn't charge any money for it, obviously. I was happy to just be asked to do it. Just say, oh yeah, you need a DJ. Okay, I can do it. I actually did it for my graduation. But for my graduation in Form 6, I did some pre-mixes that I did beforehand because I wanted to enjoy the party.
Just in case.
Also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I didn't want to spend the whole time behind the turntables doing mixing. So I did a few mixes and then did some live.
That's a secret. Okay. Because I always wonder, like, shit, there's a lot of pressure to come on, like, get that mix perfectly every single time. Okay, that's good to know.
Well, one of the things is that you practice a lot, right? Like, so when new music would come out, I would just, okay, how is this rhythm going to fit with this other rhythm? One of the good things in the Caribbean is that we have like the rhythms. So like there are a few people sing on a certain rhythm. So that's quite easy to mix into. Yeah. But I mean, besides the DJing stuff, I was into like cricket also.
Okay.
I wasn't good at cricket, but I was into cricket a bit. So I played like at my younger years, like Form 1, 2, 3. And I think probably once in Form 4. But I kind of stopped after there because I wasn't that good. But
but you still enjoyed it, right?
I thought it was good. Like it was something to do that didn't focus only on like the academic side of things, and you kind of built different relationships. Like you met people that weren't necessarily in your class, and you formed that kind of bond. And like when you do foolishness and the coach calls with you and buffs you up, right? All the other teammates can relate to that, you know.
Yes.
So you kind of bond over the pain.
You know, that's not something you're literally the first guest that has said, who has teased that out of playing a sport. And I sort of commend you for that, because I didn't necessarily think of that particular avenue of bonding over pain across like just a pool of random people, but we all have pain in common because coach is saying, hey, you're terrible, do something better.
Exactly. No, I thought it was like, I'm making it seem like it was all pain, but it wasn't, right? But yeah, I think that it's something that other people wouldn't necessarily relate to, right? Like no one else got that that buff, that curl from the coach, right? Besides a few lads. Like,
yes. And were you like a serious student? Like, did you study really hard? Did you have a lot of friends that helped you out? What was your strategy in high school?
I would say that I would say I was more serious in high school than I was in primary school.
Okay.
Just because going into Presentation College, it was more of a prestigious school.
Yeah. Presentation is a serious school.
Yeah. Mandela might have other opinions.
Okay.
But I think it was really good in that sense that it kind of forced me a bit to think about, okay, well, I have all these new people coming in, everyone's kind of really good. So it kind of pushed me a bit on that side. But I wouldn't say I wasn't the most studious student. And I had a group of friends, especially Form 5 into Form 6, a group of friends who we hosted parties and stuff like that, with other people, with other schools, girls and guys.
Nice,
so we kind of, I would say we were, if you were to look at us from the outside, you would think we were just slackers. We always we were always scared about going to Lime and doing these things. But at the same time, almost everyone from my friends group, all of us got scholarships. So it's not like
what? That bad?
Yeah,
Bad.
It's not like we just did all the partying and then didn't study, right? I think all of us had a good balance of what we can and can't do, and how to manage going to Zen, going to 51 degrees, but also at the same time, studying for CXE and CAPE. So I think I was a mix of both. It was a good mix, at least I found. And up to this day, I always like to have a mix of work hard and play harder kind of mentality, So that's how I would say my philosophy was throughout high school. I was never in Presentation College, there's this day, right? Where the whole school plays football. So they split it up into Form 1 and Form 2 play against each other, 3 and 4, the whole day. And there would be some people, and there's no teaching on that day. There would be some students who would not play, we had to create teams and stuff wouldn't create any team or wouldn't play and just stay in class and study. But for all my years, I played presentation. I played Pres Day every year. So I think definitely not, I would say not studious, but
right.
When I needed to do my work, and especially that month or 2 months before
exams and stuff like that.
Exams, CXE and CAPE, it was definitely no partying. That was head down, focus.
Okay. Work. So I wanted to actually abstract some really good lessons or traits that I'm seeing there. Is I was the inverse. Okay, so I would be one lineman a lot, and last minute, 2 months before, I'm like, hey, I had to study for this thing. I don't know how to help me, and I asking everybody for help. I was definitely not the smartest person in school, not because I think I could have been one of the smartest. Actually, I really couldn't care. I didn't like school, so I relied a lot on my friends. And
you didn't like the teachers or school?
I had an issue in school. I used to fall asleep a lot, so I used to actually go to school with a pillow, and I would legit sleep in class. That's what they knew me for. So
I had a friend who always used to sleep in class too. So I think you guys should probably see. He's a doctor now, believe it or not. He's a doctor.
Well, I technically am a doctor now too. So
it's true. It's true.
And I used to feel very guilty for falling asleep and stuff like that. But even throughout my professional career, some people, when they come upon a problem, and they're like, all right, this challenge, I'm going to solve it. And they get all wired up and fired up. I'm like the opposite. I'm like, shit, I'm sleepy. I want to go take a nap. And I literally just go take a nap and I get up and I solve the problem. So that's how I got through my PhD. I would just sleep under my desk. My advisor would say, go solve
under your desk.
Yeah, I had a full bed under my desk, mat, pillow, blanket. I would spend so many nights in the lab just because, going home, I didn't actually live very far, but going home and coming out of that environment, and we'll come to environment because I'm reading this book, Atomic Habits, and actually realizing many things that I've done that led me to success had to do with the function of environment that I was creating around me. So it's interesting that a big part of your success was that peer group saying, all right, we're going to online, we live in real hard. And once it's time to book, you better be beaten book. And I had some very fun memories in high school, just like how everybody got together to play football. Like they would give us the weekend to stay at school. So like from Saturday and into Sunday, we could come into school and study. So when we were in Form 6. So what we would do is everybody comes together, you study, and then at midnight you play football. And in the next morning,
cool.
it was real good. And in the morning you wake up, everybody's sleeping on the benches and everything. And the dean would come in and say, hey, y'all did a lot of work and you leave in the morning. So what would happen naturally is everybody's studying. I come in, I eat a big thing of Chinese food, fall asleep, wake up, play football, try to do some work, didn't accomplish anything. And so I go into the story just to remind students in high school that, even if you'd slacked, you can still sort of recover to some degree. Not necessarily if you don't get a scholarship and you don't have financial means to pursue other things. But that was good. And the other thing I wanted to tease out of your high school journey is you're listening to music, and the concept of music and the pursuit of musical talent is something I'm paying a lot more attention to across different people that I interview and just people I meet. And I notice that those who investigate music as an art form tend to have access to a different part of their brain, and they seem to be able to think in a different way and maybe solve different problems. You want to speak to that?
I guess that's interesting because for me, I can definitely see that. I haven't been that introspective to say I've thought a bit about it, but I would say definitely to some extent, because especially like when I was younger, I think it allowed me to think about things in a slightly different way, while like being so focused on the music. Like for instance, when I would listen to like songs, like a lot of my friends at the time, there'd be a popular song, whether from like Cartel or Movado at the time, that was a big war going on. But then one thing I kind of teased out was like, these people are not just how their word play, how they construct sentences, how they deliver lines. Like it may be a bit crass, but you could tell it was thought out. It wasn't just someone just
it's very
randomly
intentional.
coming up with these. Yeah, it's super intentional. And I think that helped me a lot with respect to, especially I can pinpoint for my English and literature side of things, because whereas other people, when we had to write our stories, they would just do it in the typical format. I always like to do it in the opposite format. So I always had some kind of twist ending. I had something that would lead you down one route and then change it at the other end.
Okay.
And I think like I always wanted to flip the script on its head, like think about it in a different way, a different frame to what the question is asking. Hopefully still answering the question. Sometimes it works, sometimes it might not work. It was a bit of trial and error. I remember my English teacher had a chat with me once. You're like, you can't just say she killed him at the end and didn't leave clues.
Okay.
So I kind of learned to hold my craft a bit, but I definitely would say, I think for the work side of things, it helped. And also like being open to like new experiences. Like like at the moment, like Afrobeats is getting really popular, right? But like I was listening to that a while ago, and then I was also listening to like classical music and music without words, like people in the Caribbean. That's like not really something that they're super familiar with, and like lo-fi beats and these kinds of things. And I think it helped me a lot in opening my mind to different cultures, different ways of thinking. And like whether it directly affected me, I can't say per se, but I know it opened my mind to these other experiences.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that most people may not pick up on early in their career is like all the extra little things that you do make you a better problem solver, especially in machine learning. And when you have to come up, you have a set of tools, you have this problem you're trying to solve, they don't exactly fit. And there's this iteration process that you have to go through. You have to try something, it didn't work. And you look very closely and think about what specific piece do I need to adjust. And as a DJ, to some degree, you have to know, okay, I'm gonna mix these two songs. I need to know the timings of these two songs. And I'm stepping definitely way out of my zone, but someone had a very interesting conversation with me. And because I found it very fascinating that he had his headphones off, but I knew he was listening to another song and he was getting ready to cue it up. And he was about to pull it in. I was like, but you're not hearing the song. How do you know what you're doing? And he's like, I know the timing of the beats of both songs. So I know how to sort of fit them in. But what I'm trying to communicate there is there's a lot of trial and error that you probably had to go through to get two songs to mix really well. So you try it. All right, that didn't sound good. You do it again. That didn't sound good. But a lot of that was around you were going for this goal of like, I want this to sound really good. And you were willing to go through all the edits that you had to do in order to succeed there. So I think that perseverance through iteration, I think is an interesting skill that many people actually don't have. They get really frustrated and like they lose focus. Any thoughts on that? How do you focus on like, do you get pressured when you don't get something to work?
That's a good, I would say for me, kind of alluded to like the DJ side of things too. Like, for instance, when you're mixing the music, as you mentioned, right, you want to make sure that the beats line up. And when it doesn't work, I kind of plod through consistently until I get it to work, right? I like to sit down and think about it. So I don't necessarily get frustrated.
Okay.
I just change my mind to think about, okay, how can I solve this? Obviously, it's something that I can solve.
Okay.
How do I go about solving this? So I think it's similar for like building a model. I build a model, it doesn't work. Okay, why isn't it working? I think I am someone who would rather sit with the problem for a long period of time to solve it rather than like break it up. Like I know you prefer to sleep on it. I prefer to go through. I like to go think about it. Okay, try this. Like I remember one time I spent like 2 hours after work trying to solve this one thing. And then eventually I got it. I was like, okay, now I can relax. Otherwise, I would just be thinking about it whole day.
All the time.
Just trying to, think about it. So I wouldn't necessarily say I get stressed. I mean, obviously I do, right? I think everyone gets stressed. But I like to think about it, keep iteratively going until I solve it. Because it's not like I know that I can solve it. So once I know it's within my grasp to solve it, I know there's a solution. I keep going until I can solve it. And I also take back that 2 hours the next day in work. Like I work 2 hours less the next day just to counteract that. I just say work hard, play harder.
Okay, that's interesting. I think I subconsciously do that, but I didn't know that you consciously like, all right, tomorrow I'm just gonna relax. And I think sometimes your brain is just tired, to be honest, right? From the day before. Yeah. Cool. And I think those that are listening, I've been wondering why the hell these people talking about music and all this stuff. And what I want to communicate in that prior discussion is a lot of your progress in these big tech companies comes from you, one, knowing yourself, and two, having all of these little extra facets of your personality that allow you to solve bigger problems, communicate better, communicate across different groups and in certain things. And I think cricket is a really good networking tool, right? I noticed there's a big population of people that love cricket. So like when I go out to Silicon Valley and they're like, oh, you're from Trinidad. Oh, you're from West Indies. So on. They started Brian Lara. And they started to name off cricketers. And I'm like, shit, I should probably go learn some of these cricketers because, these are VPs of the company that are speaking to me because of their love for cricket. And that's an instant connection, right? Have you experienced something similar in when you're out there in some of these big tech companies?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Especially like the countries that follow cricket, like England, India, Australia, like these popular countries, and the people from them, they're quite interested in cricket. So I think it's just like I think about it, like when I meet someone from the Caribbean here, it's almost like an instant connection. There's something we both have that we can get along quite easily. So it's similar with cricket, right? There's this common camaraderie between you guys, two people that you're like, okay, yeah, you click almost instantly. You don't have to go through the boring like, oh, where do you work? What do you do? This kind of thing. Is there something that you both are passionate about? That you connect one time. So I definitely would. And to me, it extends to not only at work but also like in the gym. Like I met a trainer in the gym who's super into cricket. So now we talk about it every time we go there. He gives me free sessions sometimes. So it works out really well.
Wow.
So it's good. Yeah.
Great. So I think this is an interesting segue to maybe bring the question up a little further. So the hypothesis is, because we are from like a multicultural place in the Caribbean, and we just know how to vibe with everybody, that makes us more effective at work in communicating across teams and just being, I think, a very welcoming teammate. And as we get into leadership roles, understanding different perspectives a lot easier and being able to bridge conversations. What has been your experience, having Caribbean heritage in working at all these different tech companies and throughout your career?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with respect to like thinking about different cultural experiences, different diversity in different ways, right? Not necessarily in gender or skin color, but just diverse ways of thinking, of behaving, of cultures. And I think from being in the Caribbean, it definitely enhanced that. Like, for instance, as you mentioned, like as I became a bit more senior, I would always push back on anything that I felt like, whether it be some managers or PM or someone that wants to implement something that I think I don't want to say that I think, but that I believe we're not taking into consideration everyone.
Yes.
We're not being empathetic to everyone's differences, right? And everyone's strengths. Because just because someone doesn't like one thing doesn't mean they're bad at it, right? They have a strength somewhere else. And I think that is something key for me, I believe. And I also think too, it's also being in the Caribbean, I feel a sense of pride, and I always like to ensure that my culture and myself, like right now I'm speaking in a bit of broken English, right? When I'm in a professional setting, I have to kind of correct it, but I don't like to do that all the time. I like people to understand where I'm coming from, what I'm saying, So I always like to push for that for others, for other differences. And that's something I'm really very strong about. Like I always push back on things that I feel that aren't very unwelcoming to everyone in the team, or a bit, not taking into consideration everyone.
Do you ever sort of, I'm going to use the word suffer. Do you ever suffer from like small island mindset? I'm from the Caribbean. Okay, I'm in these big companies, and why will people listen to me? Did you experience any of that at all?
Yeah, I think Google kind of changed that, because they were one of the companies that I think it was probably a good company for me to really solidify my professional experience, almost 3 years working for them. And
yes,
they were very open to hearing what I had to say. And it kind of gave me confidence to say, okay, because I had the same small island mindset, like, okay, I'm this small Trinidadian guy just joining this big company, like my opinion is not as good as maybe some of these other people with their flashy degrees from flashy schools and stuff like that. But they really gave me the opportunity. So like, for instance, I went back home a few times at Google to give like different talks. Like this is the first time Google did anything in the Caribbean. Well, not anything, but anything recruitment wise in the Caribbean.
Okay.
And I think it was a good experience for me to kind of think, okay, our opinion counts and matters. And whereas when I went to other companies and they might not be as welcoming as Google, I would say, I still had that belief in myself that, okay,
your voice mattered.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I can do this. So
that's good to know.
Right now, I'm not afraid. Like I would tell people as it is, how I see it. But sometimes I'm wrong, right? Like I accept that I'm not infallible. Sometimes I'm wrong, but I'm not afraid to give my opinion.
That's good. I've been experiencing that at NVIDIA too. Like, so what's interesting, I think, for everyone listening in their early career, depending on which company you go to, all of a sudden, some companies really like email, and in the email chain, there's some higher up people, and the shit that you say can kind of come back to bite you sometimes if you say it incorrectly, and if you don't express yourself in a way that is inclusive of everyone's context, especially as a technical person. So I have a much deeper appreciation for writing now, because I deeply regret that I did not pay attention in all of my English and literature classes. I'm like, why the hell am I learning all this shit? And
but you did write your thesis, right, Mark?
that is as painful as eating nails. So, what's interesting? I have a friend who's a quantum physicist. Okay, right. This is like quantum physicist at NVIDIA. So it's not like quantum physicists and like This is like real quantum physics people. Not real, but just different level. Anyway, the dude is doing his PhD and he's like, dude, I have to write this dissertation and I don't know if I could do it. I'm like, what? Like, you could solve quantum physics and struggle to write, just write your thoughts down. So it's amazing how underestimated I think the skill of writing is. And I like to spend time on this topic because, I'm big into sales as well. So I'm sort of like a student of sales more formally now. And one of the big things, like if you watch all these internet marketers, they've become multi-millionaires, some billionaires from just writing how you set up a sales page. And the reason why I'm spending time on this topic is you mentioned really noticing how artists use language to communicate emotion. And in professional settings, you also have to use language to communicate value and to communicate different things. So how was maybe some of your linguistic pursuits helped you to maybe write or communicate within a corporate environment?
Yeah, I think definitely, Mark, this is super important. That's something I didn't think about initially to bring up in the podcast, but it's so important. I think being able to write properly, communicate what you're saying in whatever tone that you want is super, super important. And I think it's also important both for personal, like as you mentioned, like you're messaging maybe a VP who's in the chain, or you're talking to the VP himself, or messaging or sending something to some stakeholder. But also to things like technical docs. Like one thing that I've found is that people write really good code, but their documentation skill and explaining, like I don't need you to explain why you wrote like this particular line of code, right? Like I can probably kind of figure it out. I want to understand why. Why did you write code? I like to write my documentation like why I did something as opposed to what it is. You know? I think that's something that I have internalized and I think has helped me a lot, because I like to, when I join a company, look at their technical docs and say, okay, we need to improve a lot of things. And I think that actually helps. As you mentioned, it's kind of like not everyone was into music. Not everyone thinks about these things. And because I think about it, I think it helped my career a bit, because I'm also always thinking about how can we improve these things. Like this is something that's lacking. We're improving it. I'm sure it impact. It might necessarily be building a model, but it's something else that I'm sure it impact. And I think that's actually almost as important as like your immediate work. Show your impact outside. And by changing these technical documents, or by being able to write this blog or write this tutorial, you're actually upskilling a lot of engineers. So I think it's super important, and it helps. And it's not to say I'm a good writer now. I think I can still improve. Like,
yes,
I think there's a long road ahead of me still to be at the level of like some of the great writers of our time. But I think I put a lot more effort into it. And I think I see the reward of taking the extra time to read over, rewrite, draft, and submit these particular, whether it be an email or a doc or whatever. I think it's super important to get that communication clear.
So when you've done these doc changes, and I'll share a similar story, you got feedback from other people in the company that, hey, we really like that you fix this documentation, and people enjoyed learning from it. Did you receive that type of feedback from other engineers?
I think so. And it's also not only modifying docs, but adding new docs. Like it's things that senior engineers might already know, but it's like you're not necessarily writing documentation. Yeah, exactly. So when someone new joins, they're like, how do we do this? And then you have to go and find someone that spends like an hour meeting with them. So yeah, I think the feedback I got was like, this is really, really useful. And I think it allowed more senior stakeholders to see, okay, look, Stefan is actually doing things and it's things that people mightn't think of doing, right? Like no one necessarily writes all this code and then, okay, I'm going to document this perfectly. People like write a code, ship it, it's done.
Yes.
But I really like to take that extra effort and see it through. And that's how I kind of like, even with this newish team that I'm with right now, that's what I'm kind of pushing them to do a lot. They're super good technically, but they don't necessarily...
They don't finish the work. They don't round it out.
Exactly. Like you're doing these steps. Okay, if someone else wanted to change that, they'll have to message you. Why don't you just write this, put it into our documentation?
Yes.
On our portal, and then anyone can do it now. So that's kind of what I'm kind of pushing. But yeah.
Good. And for those listening, I know usually in the show by this time we're like digging into different parts of the technical career, and I think these things are important because when you enter a very large organization or any organization, to be honest, executive visibility is very important. And what is the importance of executive visibility? It means you are having an impact in the company. And one of the easiest and best ways to have impact in the company is to up-level the employees, meaning give them a new skill, give them a new perspective, allow them to grow in their knowledge of the business. And the other thing to do is also to remove dependencies on people. So naturally, a lot of people keep a lot of knowledge to themselves, and the company becomes dependent on them. So they have job security. And my particular strategy is just to break that. So if I meet someone that has very specific knowledge, I capture it and then I put it all out there. Now, that some people might get pissed, and my particular strategy is I want to work myself out of a job. So I would openly put my knowledge out there, even though there are people who would take it and say it's their own thing. But I make sure to know that people knew that I put it out, so that my name is out there. They know the value of my work, and even though I may risk, someone getting praise for something that I did, you run those risks. But I think if you put your documentation, and specifically documentation is very powerful because it can affect many people. Many people then associate it to you. People friggin' hate writing documentation. So it's an easy opportunity to get a win inside of a business. And not many people write good documentation. And I think me being a slacker and me struggling to learn, I write documentation from that perspective, meaning, hey, I'm assuming you don't know anything when I go to write it. So I'll take the extra time to explain it to you, to bring you to that point. So I'm happy to hear that you're deploying similar strategies at work.
No, I think that's a good point you brought up, Mark, which is how I actually think about documentation. Like, people might write a technical doc and like they're writing it for their colleague, or they're writing it for themselves. That's how I would say they're writing the documentation for themselves. But when you think about it, like even when you read someone else's, your colleague's documentation, even though you might have learned similar stuff, there's some nuances that aren't necessarily captured, right? And that's why similar to you, when I write it, I like to write it, breaking it down to the simplest form. Like even if it's repeating myself, I think it's super useful because someone might have forgotten what I did, might have forgotten a few things, especially, and if someone like a stakeholder is wants to read it, they'll get that in the first paragraph or two. They can get a summarized version and understand what I think is important is the background, like especially stakeholders, like for those early in their career, like when stakeholders are listening to what you're presenting, most of the time they have a somewhat of an understanding and somewhat of knowledge, but they spend their whole days in meetings like these. And to really get the most out of like a meeting with them and for them to remember your project more is for them to understand it. Take your time and explain the motivation behind what you're doing. Like, don't just go, okay, my model 90% accuracy, right? The stakeholder, the senior person, they care actually less about the accuracy, more about what you're doing and the business impact. And they want to know why you're doing it. Well, I am building this model because we saw that we did the investigative work and ranking carousels seemed to give us somewhat of an uplift. And why is this important? Because in our OKRs, so in our objectives in the company, we saw that we wanted to improve click-through rate for ads or something like that. And by doing this ranking, we saw a better uplift. And that's why we're doing it. And then what were these results when we put it into production? Okay, we saw an uplift, or we didn't see an uplift, and why? So I think that's quite important that you touched on that.
Great. And I wanted to piggyback off of that into a note for researchers. So I've spoken to several folks from home and other places that I want to get into research. And you have two choices when you get into research. You either go research on your own as an independent consultant, 2 in an academic institution, or 3 within industry. And okay, so if you're doing it on your own, have fun. If you're doing it in an academic institution, especially in the US and the UK, be ready to write a shit ton of grants and try to bring in money. And you still have to justify the value of your research, not only from an accuracy standpoint, but probably more so to the other technical people that are in the conferences that give you access to the body of knowledge, so to say. And then in industry, like you are saying, with, hey, nobody really cares about your model. They really care about what is the impact of your work. And I think for those beginning their career, mid-career, focus on that, right? It's not your technical skill and your ability to create pipelines that is the only thing that will get you to the next level at some of these top companies. It's your ability to hone in on the business value. And I think I was fortunate enough early in my career to figure that out from both mentorship and other things, and but also, keeping that as a core focus. I don't even care about when someone comes up with this new paper. I'm like, okay, can I put this thing into production? No, all right, waste of my time. Move on. And so good cycles. Cool. All right, so we got slightly we dove in a big detour there, but I think it was useful.
Yeah.
College. So you went to UE. You're a party man in high school, a responsible party man. So now you come to college and you did computer science. Why did you do computer science?
So interesting story. So when I was in high school, I did IT, information technology, for CXC. And then when I was doing it, I had classes in Form 1 to 3, but I wouldn't really say they were IT, right? They were just more like, this is what a bit is, how to add and subtract bits and stuff that wasn't too interesting. Then I did IT in Form 4 and 5, and I thought it was like super easy and super cool.
Okay.
Right. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm onto something here. And I didn't feel that way necessarily about any other subjects. When I graduated in Form 5 and I moved into Form 6, unfortunately, Presidential College, they didn't have enough people wanting to do IT that year. So I did like a random mix of maths, biology, and physics. Like,
what?
It's a random mix. And I just did it because for UE, you needed maths and I think 1 science to get into UE for computer science. And then when I told my parents that, well, I'm going to apply to do computer science, they were like, no. you're going to do engineering. And I was like, no, I want to do computer science. And, it's that mentality that we have in Trinidad of like doctor, lawyer, engineer. That's it. That's like the true roles that parents see as like the gold standard of what their child what success for their child would look like. And I knew that was something I didn't want to do at all. So at that point, when it felt like a punt, I just took this chance on doing computer science because I didn't know what I was going to end up doing per se, but I knew I really enjoyed it and I was passionate about it. Whereas I wasn't passionate about engineering and I was definitely not passionate about being a doctor. So I just took a punt and did it. And my first year I actually did computer science and management because my parents were like, compromise, do some management, right? Okay. Because they were both business people. So they were like, okay, do some management. So you could probably have a business at the end.
In case you fail, right?
And computer science part is just useless. So I did that my first year, but then after the first year, I realized, okay, listen, I'm super into this. And especially when I was looking at like courses coming up for the computer science only degree, I was like, I need to drop this management and focus a lot on computer science. And I think when I did that in my second year is when I excelled drastically in computer science, I would say, because I focused on things that I thoroughly enjoyed alone. And on the work side, I think it was really, really good because I was able to get like top marks and stuff like that. But I think it's not because I was the smartest person there, but it's because I was one of the few people who actually was super interested in doing it.
Yes.
Like a lot of people, it's kind of like the opposite in the UK and the US. It's so hard to get into like a really good computer science program. But in the UK, it's quite easy because people want doctor, lawyer, engineers. They prefer to do electrical engineering rather than computer science.
Right.
And it's much easier to get in computer science. So people kind of have computer science as a backup. Not their like first choice.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's maybe it changed since this is 8 years. Wow, it's 8 years. 8 years ago since I graduated. But that's how it was back then. And I was one of the few people who was super interested in it. And like I remember there was this hard course. There were these two hard courses called, I know you had Kyle on recently.
Yes.
He can verify
were you
this.
like going to school with him?
No, Kyle was a few years ahead. Kyle actually taught me one of my final year courses.
Shit. Yeah. Okay.
Actually, two courses I was in, Kyle taught.
Damn. Kyle making people some money.
Yeah, I'd say thank you, Kyle, for your mentorship and your help and giving me and passing me in my exams. But yeah, they were like these hard courses and everyone failed. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna gun it. I'm gonna try my hardest for these two courses. I didn't only want to pass. I wanted to excel.
Mash them up.
And I definitely mashed them up both times. And I felt so proud of myself. Like my parents didn't understand. They were like, "Oh, you did well. Okay, that's good." But they didn't understand the heartache and the pressure that people had to repeat a year because they failed these courses.
Wow.
So I think it shows that, again, not because I was smart, but because I was passionate about it. Whereas other people were just doing it to finish a degree.
Yes.
I was doing it because I thoroughly enjoyed like studying for it and these kinds of things. And unfortunately, at the same time, my DJ career kind of
fell off. Yeah.
Fell off. I'm still into music and stuff now, but in college, it kind of dropped a bit.
So two questions I want to ask based on this. The first is, I've been spending a lot more time on the idea. I think as you get older, you realize there's less time for you to hit your financial goals. There's less time for you to do the things that you plan to do in your life. And maybe you get, I don't know if that's what they call midlife crisis or whatever, but either way, what I'm trying to communicate.
I think you're too young for midlife crisis.
I hope so. I feel like I've had midlife crisis like my whole life. So because the reason I think we have opposite stories in that I'm totally jealous that you were fully passionate and found what you were fully passionate about very early on. And I love and I both hate to listen to those stories because I'm like, damn, like I didn't have that. And not to say like I don't like your story. What I want to understand is, or what advice do you have for folks that there are things that come easy to you that are hard, that is hard for others to do? And did you sort of internally recognize, like, hey, maybe computer science, in addition to your passion for it, which forced you to work a lot, work was a lot easier, but did it come natural to you? And what were things that came natural to you that were hard for other people to do, if that makes sense?
That's a very good question, Mark. So I definitely know that, especially, I want to say so for instance, like I think I was able to extrapolate a bit more. So like we learn what X is in school, but I could figure out if X and Y came into the exam, like how we can work on it. I think it's because I was passionate that I would look at, like, okay, we learned about object-oriented programming, for instance. Like I would go online and like look at tutorials and read some blogs, and I didn't feel, to me, like it was a waste of time, or like I wasn't trying to study. I was just like reading up stuff. So I think
exploring
maybe
almost, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just trying to find out more information than what we were getting. I think that could have been one of the differences, in that some people just came and learned, and I did that for some courses, right? I'm not saying I did this all the time, but I think it's I don't know if that's the reason why, but I think I was definitely able to generalize a lot better.
A lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And but taking that question one level up, outside of you, just for you in general, what is something that, it could be one, it could be two, what is something that comes easy to you that is very natural? It could be useful in the marketplace or not useful at all, that is hard for others. So I'll give an example of myself. I think communicating with other people, for me, comes very naturally, because I grew up with a business in my house. I grew up in a bar. So at every moment, like, I'm just seeing a new person, I have to like instantly connect with you in order to generate revenue. Otherwise, my family would have no money. So like, I'm wired very differently. But what is it for you?
I think my partner, she would agree with me saying this, is that I get work done really quickly. Like,
wow, okay, that's why you're in Deliveroo.
Okay. It mightn't be that I necessarily do it perfect. Like other people I know, like might do the same thing I do. They might spend longer, and it might be like perfect. Whereas I wouldn't say I get it perfect. I get it enough to, like, we need to do this. I make sure I do it to the best of my ability. It mightn't be as perfected as someone else, but I'm able to do it, and do it very quickly. I think that's
done, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like like it's sprint estimations. I hope my PM isn't listening. It's sprint estimations. Like, I know I can probably finish this quicker than I probably say, but I like to give myself a buffer just in case. But I think that's one thing that I can do that comes easy for me, which is finishing work quickly. I can do that.
That's well, I'm looking at your work history, right? Google, and becoming a senior machine learning engineer at Google, I don't think is an easy feat to any degree. So I think it's probably a testament to your execution style. That's cool.
I actually, just a point on that, Mark,
that's my
estimation. I actually don't think it's my technical ability that got me that promotion. I think it was everything that else I mentioned, like the design docs, and like going back to Trinidad, the recruitment. I think that's what helped me get promoted more so than my technical work.
Wow.
I think.
Okay.
I don't know. I wasn't part of the meeting, but
no, but you would internally know, like, how you feel about AI when you necessarily ask, or you have to justify why I should go up for senior, and you pull all the things that you've done, right? Okay, let me actually dive into that. Tell me.
Okay, sure.
So yeah, Google, you come in as a machine learning engineer, right? And this was, let me see if I'm watching timelines. This is after you went to University of Cambridge. Yeah, first, actually, let's take a quick step back. Tell us how you went from what happened after UE? What happened after your undergrad?
Yeah, so after UE, I was lucky enough to take a chance at like a NASA internship. So
Yeah, I
I
saw
happened
that.
to get that. Yeah.
That's cool.
Honestly, that's a story in and of itself. Like when I went to the interview, it was definitely the worst interview that I almost wanted to cry at the end of it because it felt like it was a panel of 4 or 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people who were interviewing me just was very harsh. And I was like,
Okay.
I've never experienced this before. I didn't even go to UE after that. I was like, I'm taking a break. I'm going home.
Wow.
And then when I got the call, I was like, wow, okay, I didn't expect this. So when I went to NASA, I did that for like twice. And then I was working with Patrick at this point in time also.
Mm-hmm. So you actually on
And then
site at NASA in like the States when you did
it
the
was
interview?
it was in Mountain View, so very near Google's
Whoa.
campus in Silicon Valley.
Damn, that's
with
cool.
the Ames Research Center. It was quite cool. It's quite cool.
Shit,
I really
bad.
enjoyed my time there.
Okay. And then after that, yeah, continue.
Yeah, then after that, I decided to apply to Cambridge. I was again surprised that I got through. I was not really expecting it. Like to be honest, I was not expecting it. I had like tons of other universities that I was going to apply to, but their deadline was like earliest, so I applied to them first, and I got accepted. I was like, okay, I'm not going to worry about that.
Okay.
And then there, I would say it was really interesting because I came up there in 2016. Well, here in 2016 in Cambridge, and I focused on like natural language processing. That's what I did. But I don't want to talk too much on technical side because
Sure,
it was okay. But I think what was better for me was the experience itself. Like it was a totally new experience. Like I know everyone was super smart.
yes.
But I definitely was not the smartest people. They were like, you think I get work? I think I get work done. There was this one particular guy. Oh my God, he was insane. Like he would finish work the next day, but he wasn't someone who you would think of like nerdy. He was always down to party, to line, whatever. But he was up to now, he's really good. But yeah, I think it was like interacting with these people from all around the world, going to like what we call balls, like how you imagine like in Bridgerton and these Netflix series where there's like the fancy balls. It was something similar to that.
Okay.
It was super cool. Like I really enjoyed my time there, and I think the people aspect of Cambridge sold me more than the academic aspect.
Interesting.
Of Cambridge. Yeah, like it was so good, and they had very smart professors, and I learned a lot. But I cherish more the people side of things. And I actually, funny story, I went to one of the first freshers week, right? I went to my college, and they had like different clubs you can join. I was like, let me do something that I've never did before.
Okay.
Right. So they had like the cricket club and the football club and stuff like that. I was like, no. Okay, there's rugby. I was like, I don't know anything about rugby. I never played rugby, I never watched rugby. I was like, okay, I'll try. So I did like 2 practice sessions with them, and they were trying to explain to me the rules. And then I went to a game with them. I didn't play, obviously. I was just sitting down watching. And then one of my teammates, midway through the game, he dislocated his shoulder. Right? And then I just saw him walking off. I was like, are you okay? Do you need me to call an ambulance? He was like, no, I'll just pop it back in later. I was like, what? And then about a few hours later, we were back at, having a party in the college area. And then I saw him drinking, taking shots. I was like, what's going on here? This is not a sport for me. I cannot do that. So I immediately ended my time at the rugby session.
Rugby is I played some of that in high school, and when I realized, hey, my little frame here, I not built for that, and dislocating your shoulder like you're saying and popping it, I was like, nah, I cool. that is kind of funny. You know what's interesting? Mandela, who also went to University of Oxford, he went to Harvard. You know, one of his comments that he said was the value that he got at Harvard wasn't the professors, like what you're saying. It was the people around him, and like these super sharp people that he was be able to learn from and to model. So it's cool that coming into a new environment at a top institution, it's actually, you know, your classmates and things like that. Great.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. Mandela had a similar
yeah,
experience.
and I like to, you know, try to find parallels across the stories as well. One quick thing I wanted to ask that I want to do for the people at home, and for actually anyone in the world who goes to a non-brand name school like myself, right? So I went to Florida Tech. If you ask somebody to find that on a map, they'll just put it somewhere in Florida, probably Miami. And the reason why I bring this up is Kyle brought this up in his interview about,
right,
was my UE education good enough? And he compared that, like he asked himself the question, was my UE education as good enough as a Stanford? And his answer was yes, because he had put in all his extra work and he was still willing to put in the work, even though he was not at this big institution. Tell us about your mindset, like before you went to Cambridge, because now, okay, you have Cambridge as a brand, but when you had UE as a brand, what was your mindset and how did it shift?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Carl. I think, okay, so before going to Cambridge, I was definitely a bit unsure as to like where I would be, how challenging the courses would be.
Okay.
Like, would I succeed? Like, I know I succeeded in UE, but would I succeed also in Cambridge? And I was totally unsure. So I remember like I was trying to like look at the courses I was going to probably do and see if I could find some things online to kind of give me somewhat of a head start. And to be honest, they didn't really give me any head start because the courses are slightly different to what's online. But I would definitely say that I felt just as competent as anyone else.
Okay.
I think my UE education was sufficient enough to get me to the level that I need to be at to compete. I don't want to say compete, but to be successful.
To hold your own, essentially.
Exactly, at Cambridge. And I think it stems from the fact too that I was interested, similar to what Carl said, I put in the work at UE and I internalized what they said. And I tried to I totally enjoyed it and I put a bit more than I think someone who's casually doing it might put in. So I think that's why I was able to succeed or hold my own, as you said, at Cambridge. So to be honest, I think the courses at Cambridge were not more challenging than like the hardest courses. Not to say like they were all easy, but they weren't as challenging. They weren't more challenging than the hardest courses at UE.
Okay, that's cool to know. And I think one of the threads one of the lessons I wanted to abstract from that is people rely on an institution to educate you. Whereas when you go to school, you have to recognize that the class that you're taking, most of the time, is an absolute waste of time if you do not put in the work and you put in your own curiosity into the material that you're learning. I remember there was this one class called Intro to Real Analysis. I don't know if you ever had to take that class where you learn like the fundamentals of math, like why does integration exist? Why does differentiation exist? And my advisor made me take that class. He's like, this is the hardest class you're ever going to take. And I took it with this Indian professor. So, I'm Indian and I'm with maths, they're bad. And they're very serious. And I had to rap. So like for me to learn this material, I would rewrite theorems. I would rap them. I would record myself rapping them. And I don't know why I decided to rap them because I just had to find some way to learn this like mundane material. And like I'll just be walking around listening to myself rapping theorems. And like when I'm in an exam, I'm like, so boom, I rap out that theorem. And it's something I never wanted to do, but I decided, hey, like I need to pass this class. And I had deep respect for my teachers. And I wanted to make sure that, okay, this person is putting time into me. I want to give them the respect of my best effort in this thing, even though it wasn't something I was passionate about, but I really dove in and I tried my best. And some advice that professor gave me, he's funny. He's like, all right, you're studying and all this. He gave me some incredible life advice, by the way. And the thing I want everyone to listen about this is you never know when someone will give you a piece of advice that will shift fundamentally or could fundamentally shift like your life and your way of thinking. And one thing that he told me is the modern paradigm of education makes people into beggars because they go around holding their degree. Give me a job, give me a job, give me a job. He's like, when you graduate, you have the knowledge. Your knowledge is power. And when you go to someone for a job, you're like, there may be a shit ton of people who may be better than me, but I know what I can do. Here's what I have done. Would you like me to, teach or do any of these things? And the one line that he said was, education is that, I guess in the Sanskrit language, there's a term for education. And he's like, education is that which liberates you from fear. I was like, what? He's like, fear from what? Fear from the unknown. And I think as I've explored my own machine learning career, there's many things that you come upon that you kind of don't know what's going to happen. And his words actually happened on recording. I almost listened to it every morning just for inspiration. And I share that story for several threads. One, I think you understand the importance of music and the impact that it can have just on your overall mood. And in addition to that, how that self-talk that you have internally plays a big part. So I just wanted to share that quick story there. It wasn't really quick, but
no, I think it was useful. Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback off of that into your experience both at Google and then at Twitter as a machine learning engineer and as a senior machine learning engineer.
Yeah.
Talk about mindset when you get into those companies, right? What was your imposter syndrome like?
Yeah, so I was going to say it's very, very much an imposter syndrome, especially more so at Google, because it was one of my first industry jobs and I didn't know what to expect. So I went in there, the interviews were hard. I remember prepping, I was in a graduate program after I finished Cambridge at a company called EF, Education First. Really good people there. When the opportunity came to Google, I was not going to turn it down. I said yes, right?
Yes.
And then I remember spending time on the train, going to work, back work, studying really hard to try to get it. And then when I got it, I was super shocked. And I made a bad decision of not negotiating more for my salary. So that's a lesson learned for all those young people out there. I know you're going to ask me about my books, but there's a good blog about salary negotiation.
Okay, good.
Super useful for anyone at any level of their career, but especially early on. But yeah, that's a bit of a sidetrack. But yeah, when I joined, I realized that I had a good manager when I joined, and he's basically told me there's going to be imposter syndrome. You're going to feel like, oh, these people know so much more than me. There's going to be all these challenges. But he was like, I think he was really helpful in making me similar to what you said. I know what I can do, and we hired you because you can do it. You can excel in this role. Otherwise, they focus a lot more on hiring than probation periods where people might be hired and then some companies take the probation period seriously. I think Google caters more on hiring. Okay, once we hire you, we know more likely you're going to be successful. So he kind of built me up a bit, especially that I was more of a younger person, probably a mid-level. I was in a mid-level role, but I was still very much an imposter. I remember seeing people coding these insane things. I remember my first set of code that I asked to review, it was just destruction. Destruction. There's no other way to describe it other than utter destruction. But after a while, you kind of, and I realized it was everything that, all the comments that I got, it was ultimately helpful.
Okay.
And I was able to, it was definitely a good learning experience. And by after my first performance review, I kind of figured out where I am in the company, basically, and where I can have impact with what I'm going to be doing. So I would say the first couple weeks and months, I definitely had that imposter syndrome and being bombarded with these bad PRs that I've been submitting. Well, these code reviews that I've been submitting. It was scared me at first, but I think my manager saying it's okay. Everyone is gonna go through this, and he kind of gave the parallel to when you joined university at the same time at Cambridge or whatever, you were a bit scared, right? A bit of imposter, but when you reach there, you realize I put in the work. And I mentioned that I put in the work. So I definitely felt that he helped me a lot in the early stages of my career development to ensure that I didn't feel pressured. And then afterwards, you kind of realize that everyone is super nice, super friendly, and everyone just wants you to grow.
Okay.
So you realize that obviously there are people much smarter than you, but it's again similar to Cambridge. I felt I can hold my own after being there for a period of time. But yeah, it was definitely scary at first. I'm not gonna say it wasn't.
Yeah, when I first joined NVIDIA, well, first of all, I was like, wow, I got in. Like, damn. Okay, I'm in now. And because I actually gave up a director position, I was going to lead like a research team in the startup that I was in. And this was in search. So I was in search and recommendation. So, search is a very interesting problem. And for those listening, like search means when you type in a query into a search engine and the results that come back, what are all the algorithms that it takes to get you personalized results? And, I come to NVIDIA as a senior data scientist, right? So you're not a manager, you're just an individual contributor. And I remember pinging my physicist friend. He was like my mentor, like my buddy that they give you. And just, talk about imposter syndrome when you meet people that like their execution pace is so beyond like, how much effort you have to do to get to them. And it's like, okay, that's natural. You kind of realize, okay, that's out of your natural ability because that's just how some people are wired. But he was like, listen, man, you're not going to get fired from video because like, dude, it was like 6 months. I'm like, dude, are these people going to fire me? Like, I don't think I'm picking this stuff up fast enough. It's like, listen, man, you got hired for a reason. You got hired because they trust that you can learn new things. And at NVIDIA, it's like super fast paced. Every year there's like completely new things that come out. So like whatever you thought you knew this year, like next year, just erase everything that you knew and start learning this new thing and get ready to go to the market, right? So it's cool that you had a lot of people that supported you in that journey. So cool. So I guess to respect your time, as we get to the last part of the advice section, I think this has been more of an advice interview, and which I've enjoyed because, when you see someone come from the Caribbean, they go to these top institutions and top companies, you always wonder, shit, how did they do it? Like, can I do it? What would you say to someone who has those thoughts in their mind?
I would definitely say, I think for me, you kind of see it like no one who is great at something was always great at it.
Yes.
Right. So you kind of see the end result, not the work that was put into it.
Mm-hmm.
So people might look at like your career or my career and see, oh, look at where they are, where they have achieved, but you don't necessarily see the underlying hard work. Like Usain Bolt ran 9 point whatever seconds. You don't see the hundreds of thousands of hours he spent practicing. Just like I'm sure you can agree. And I put in a lot of work, and it wasn't like something easy that I had to do. It wasn't something that was on a platter for me. I had to kind of like push. Like I took a chance to do computer science. I took a chance to the NASA internship. I took a chance to Cambridge. I took a chance to applying to Google. I took a chance. So I took chances all the time, but still trying to work hard. And I think that's one of the best advice I can give them is like, it's not easy. It's hard work, and it's easy to see the end result, and not the work that we put in, because no one is with us when we are in front of our computer practicing for interviews, studying our work. No one is there. They only see what's on LinkedIn, whatever we published. So I think that's something I would give them. Like, you see the end result, but it's lots of hard work. So don't be afraid to put in the hard work and take chances. That's what I would definitely say. Especially from the Caribbean, I took a lot of chances, and I think you should take a lot of more chances, because if you want to be successful, like, the answer is always no until you ask, right? Like, I think that's a popular saying.
Ooh,
so I think definitely that's how I think about these things.
That was a powerful one. The answer is always no until you ask. Because I just interviewed a guy, Anthony Cole. He's from Trinidad, and he's the president of the Black Employee Network at Amazon. And that's a pretty serious position. And he was just like, yeah, my one skill is that I'm not afraid to ask for what I think I'm worth. And I was like, oh, wow. And he'd gotten like insane mentors and stuff like that just by asking. So that same coming back to taking a chance, that's beautiful advice, man. Now, along with that, right? So take chances is one thing. What two pieces? Let's take it to one actually. What one piece of advice would you have for a high schooler, a college student, and a professional? And this could be, in the context of being in the Caribbean or a small region, but also just in general.
I think for a high schooler, I would definitely say I think at high school and also a bit of in college, it's good to explore. I knew I wanted to do computer science, but I wasn't exactly sure. So I did, as I mentioned, I did 3 random subjects, right? Maths, bio, chem. I wasn't sure. I wanted to explore because at least for me in high school, in secondary school, I knew I probably wanted to do it, but I wasn't sure. So definitely explore. And then for when I was at college, I think a good piece of advice that I wish I had when I was in college was, again, not only to explore, but don't be afraid to do courses that is not directly related to computer science, to what you're interested in. Because I think having those courses that are not, so for me, I can give an example. There were a few maths courses and computer science courses that we always have to do, but then there were a few literature courses. I think those helped me think about how I frame and structure things, similar to how we talk about the docs, right? And songwriting and things. I think being able to not be one track was super useful for me if I could have gone back to college. Not just computer science, but think about a few other niches that you have an interest. Because as you mentioned, songwriting was one for, well, not songwriting, but music was one for me. So I wanted to pursue that. I think for professionals, I would say enjoy difficult situations. So that could be
that's gold, man.
Negotiating, disagreeing with managers, disagreeing with people. Enjoy those difficult situations because there will be a lot, and the more that you realize that they are part of life and you know better how to navigate them, the easier they would be. And they're less uncomfortable. So when you need to bring something up or you want a higher salary, don't be afraid to get in these uncomfortable situations. You eventually, after a while, you realize nothing is really going to happen. You're not going to die, and putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations.
Ooh, those. All right, I'm gonna go ask for my raise next week already. Hey, only on the call. If you see on my LinkedIn that I switched from NVIDIA after this interview, you know that I didn't make. I didn't make it.
Stefan's advice was a failure.
Yeah, fail. Cool. And so at this stage in your career, what motivates you to continue pushing?
That's a good question. I think what motivates me to keep pushing is one, that I'm quite interested and I'm passionate about it. So I'm always happy to do the work that I'm doing. And not necessarily that I love it. I would love to be a DJ if I get the opportunity, but unfortunately that is not the case. But yeah, if I can't be a DJ, this is the next best option, I think. And then I think the second thing is that I always like to advance my knowledge. There's especially our field, data science, ML, there's so many things happening, so many interesting things. And I can't keep up with all, but I think it's quite an interesting emerging field. And to see the advancements, to be privy to it is quite, I think, rewarding for me to kind of understand what's going on internally. You see Tesla is doing this AI stuff. And then when I don't know exactly what Tesla is doing, but I have an understanding. I could think about how can I apply some of the results of some of the papers that they are publishing, into my work, and that's exciting. There are new things happening all the time. It's not the same old over and over.
That makes sense. And what 3 books do you recommend?
Yeah, so I think we mentioned earlier there was the blog. So I actually got the name of the blog to give to anyone who was interested in it. It's Salary Negotiation: Make More Money, Be More Valued. And the author is Patrick McKenzie. It's a 2012 post, but it's super relevant. And I think it's free. Like, you can just click the link, search it in Google, you get it. And it's a bit long, probably like 20 minutes to read for a blog. It's not a book, but I think it would really help most, especially like those now starting their career. Like, don't be afraid to ask for more if the situation is right.
Yes.
Okay. Like, obviously, if you don't have any other options, you don't want to ask, and don't
put yourself in a position.
Exactly, that you have to like, oh, okay, I don't have the position, the offer anymore. But yeah, I think you should understand your value and don't be afraid to push the recruiters on getting more value. And then I think one book that I was interested, that I haven't fully read yet, but I've read snippets, is What Everybody Is Saying. So BODY. So it's by Joe Navarro, who was an previous FBI agent. And it's just like a interesting book. It's not like super relevant, but it's good because you kind of like understand what different people's bodily reactions kind of mean. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean one-to-one, but it's like, so like when someone looks down, when someone is looking away from you, when they're like, if their legs are closer to you or away from you when you're sitting next to them, what does it mean? So it's things like this that the book, I haven't read it out, but I've read bits and pieces. So I think it's quite interesting as a book.
I read a body language book when I was in teenage years, and that completely messed up my head, because then I started watching people foot and they have eyes, and they're like, "What are you watching?" I'm like, "No, nothing." And you're seeing if they're interested in you and stuff like that. So that's kind of cool.
It definitely has that kind of like mentality, like like you're profiling people
aware of what people are signaling to you subconsciously. Cool. I don't know. You have a couple of minutes. You keep talking.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. There's lots of things that we covered in the interview so far, and one of the things I think was very pivotal to my success in my career throughout PhD, throughout all these so-called highly stressful situations, is working out and de-stressing. So you're both a DJ, and I'll also challenge you at the end as to where your career will go as a DJ. I have some examples. I'm sure you're very aware of them. Do you work out a lot? Like, is that like, how do you manage? I guess, how do you manage stress?
Yeah. I think there are 2 ways I manage stress, and I think one you mentioned is workout. So I usually work out 4 to 5 times a week. I'm not like, and it might seem like a lot, but it's like everyone is under an hour, right? So it's not like I'm in the gym for 2-3 hours every day.
Right.
I think one, that kind of like something about having your own time, just being with your body and doing this, is really super useful for me. And 2, it's like the mental side of things. Like, there was a good app like Headspace when I was at Google, and I started trying it. So it's all about mindfulness. I think it did wonders for me, especially like when I wake up and you kind of like have all these thoughts running through your head, and okay, I'm going to start the day. What is due, what's not due. But to have that time, that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just to sit down by yourself and not think about anything, just relax. I think that kind of, those 2 things de-stress me a lot. That's how I,
Okay. Are you a big napper by chance? Like, do you take naps? Or are you one of those people that are just like, I'm on the whole time?
If I find every time I take a nap, I wake up feeling
more tired.
Like, I'm just like,
okay,
I can't. Like, one thing about me, I can sleep easily. So like,
you can.
If I go into bed now,
that's it. You're gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been taking silent data points on people who nap. So like Thomas Edison, like what he would do when he was doing a lot of his experiments, he would have like metal balls in his hand. So he would sleep with it and his hand was off the edge of the bed. And he will have a metal pan right underneath it. Because, I had to look for in my searching of like not feeling guilty about sleeping or falling asleep. So anyway, when he would just about to fall asleep, and as his brain shifted over into like the alpha waves, the balls would fall out of his hand, hit the pan, and he would wake up. And that's when he would go work on particular problems. So that's why he was always in such a creative state. And so I use that as an excuse when I maybe take a nap or something when I'm thinking about a problem. But
yeah, that's what you tell your manager, right? Yeah, no, I'm doing exactly what Thomas Edison did, right? So
yeah, exactly. It's funny, like when I was working in an office, so I made sure to I was working in a room with, like, my manager was right behind me, right? So, but I had a corner of the room. So I'd put on a video like after lunch, like I just get sleepy after lunch. So I'd put on a video and he could see my monitors. So he would see as if I was like doing work, and I'll just have this screenplay of me moving my mouse and shit. But I was just facing the wall, passed out, like 20 minutes. So anyway, I just share that story just because, you know, there are many different ways to success. And so I guess the last question I wanted to ask was, you know, what, so I think I understand what motivates you, and you're going to become, I think you could be one of the top machine learning DJs. So I don't know if you know the CEO of, I think it's Goldman Sachs, he's a DJ. You know that, right?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, the CEO of Goldman Sachs is like a full-on, like, very famous DJ. So there are examples of these people who have these dual careers, right? So it's very interesting as you think about having a passion. And even myself with this, right? I now have more serious goals about being a podcaster, but I'm also a machine learning person. And so I look at like Lex Friedman. He's a professor at Stanford. Well, I don't think he's I forget what school he's at, but you know, but he has this super successful podcast. So I guess maybe pushing you over the edge there to, you know, check out the CEO of Goldman Sachs. I think it is Goldman Sachs. It's kind of cool that he did that. And he still plays at shows and shit. So, and people know him like that.
That's amazing.
Okay. Yeah. Any last advice for people listening?
Happy wife, happy life.
Ooh, no, I'm just a strong one.
I guess as I'm getting older, I think what you mentioned, not necessarily about de-stressing, but like being kind to your body and your mind is super useful as you get older. Like being able to laugh a lot, love, connect with people, being able to sleep, you know, exercise, drink, these things to ensure that you're in a state where you're motivated and you're not, you know, you're making the most out of life. I think that's the best I can last set of advice. I gave a ton of advice, Mark. I don't know. I don't
pull
know
everything
how much
out.
more. Yeah, I don't know how much more.
Nah, man,
it could be too because I got a lot of injuries, and I'm like, I need to be a bit more serious with how I think about exercising and how careful I am with my body. Not only working out, but like what I eat. You know, like when I was young, I was always super skinny, so I could eat donuts whole day and nothing. I'm fine. But now I can't do that.
No. But when the belly start to get big there.
Exactly.
Especially as they start to get older. It's interesting. I think men become pregnant as they get older. It's just like slowly maybe. A coconut, yeah. Hey, it was I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope those that are listening, you know, take away that, one, it is possible to, if you want to go pursue all these big careers, machine learning, tech, etc., but you can't get away from the hard work, but it is possible if you take the chances, right?
Definitely. I think you got to take chances, especially being from the Caribbean. You got to take the chances, all the chances.
Take all the chances. All right, we're going to print a shirt, and that's the next FET. You know, take a chance. Take a chance.
Well, I saw restrictions are reducing in Trinidad now. So, yeah, FETs are back.
Don't know. All right, cool. Well, appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, later.